Hello there. My name is Michael Pilarski, and I'm with the Global Earth Repair Foundation. And today I'm going to talk about agroforestry, which is one of my favorite topics. And I'm doing this as a sort of a run-up to our Global Earth Repair Convergence happening in May 2025. And agroforestry will be one of the topics there, a major topic. And so I'm just getting this out there to give people some more background if you're not real familiar with agroforestry. And even if you are, you'll probably learn a few new things. So agroforestry as a word was invented in the mid-1970s. So I started farming, organic farming in 1972. I was like 22 years old. And I've been farming and working with plants ever since. And so in about 75, 76 was when the term was invented by a group of people working for what became the International Center for Agroforestry Research, ECRAF, in Africa. And so that's where agroforestry, the word came from. And so I joined the ranks of the agroforestry people right after they invented the term. All the way back in the mid-1970s is when I got into agroforestry, and I've been studying it ever since. So I have a lot of time, and I've done a lot of research, and I've visited a lot of agroforestries, and I set up a lot of my own systems, which will show you one of those later on in this video, or a couple of them. So let's see. So the importance of agroforestry to the world is that it offers us one of the best, fastest ways to cool the climate and feed the people at the same time. There's no need for anyone in the world to be hungry. Everywhere can have local food sovereignty and grow their own food. And most of this can be done with agroforestry. The problem with the world climate heating up is because we have so many urban areas, and we all know about urban areas and their heat island effect. What a lot of people don't recognize is that all bare degraded land and farmland, when it is fallow, when it's tilled ground, that is also all heat island effect. The world has a lot of heat island effect, probably almost 25% or more of the land in the world is heat island effect. And so we need to cover those areas with vegetation, and that will cool the planet. We don't even have to do it all. We just have to do a significant chunk. And so if we take our cultivated industrial farmland and even small scale farms, and we turn their annual croplands, a percentage of them, let's say a third of the cropland that's in annual crops in the world, converted to agroforestry, will increase the yields from those lands. There'll be more food, more income for the farmers, and it will cool the climate because now we have leaves over the surface, and leaves are cooling. I won't go into all the ins and outs of the climate right now. We'll get a bit of that during the video. But I mainly want to talk about how agroforestry works, what it is. So that's the purpose of this video. So sit back and enjoy the show. We're going to show you a bunch of slides here as well. So let's get going. So here's our first slide is agroforestry, a new name for an old practice. Agroforestry, the word is new, but actual agroforestry is an old system, traditional systems that were in place throughout the world in many places. So if we look at this slide here on the upper left, that would be a cork oak pig operation, probably. It's in Portugal, Spain. There's a lot of this ground, so it's tree crops with animals mixed in. So that's a traditional system, thousands of years old. It's an agroforestry system. On the right-hand side there, we have sheep under apple trees. This will be somewhere in temperate Europe. And this again, they've been doing this for thousands of years. Fruit trees with animals underneath is one of the forms of agroforestry. And on the left down below, we have a a hurdle fence, probably woven hazel hurdles. And you can see there's a hedge there. Actually, this may be a laid hedge actually. And so this is a hedgerow which is about to regrow. And so hedgerows are also agroforestry systems. And then below we see here uh, pigs, hogs under a tree crop. So we're going to look at quite a few different slides here. So here's a whole list of agroforestry systems. And I'm just going to mention a couple of them rather than go through them one by one because we'll be looking at some of these as we go. Silviculture, and silva is tree crops with food crops. Pastoral agroforestry systems are animals under trees, and then there's animals plus crops plus under trees. There's horticultural crops, tree crops like many orchards with multiple crops and could be considered agroforestry. Down here a ways there's apiculture with trees, which means trees and bees, or you can have tree systems that are focused on honey production as part of it. Or you can also have aqua silviculture, which is trees and fish. So, and here's trees, crops, and fish. Anyway, we'll be looking at some of these in this slideshow, and I will mention right now this particular slideshow is going to be called Agroforestry Part 1, Temperate Zones. Later on, we're going to make another video on Agroforestry Part 2 for subtropical and tropical zones. So today is mostly temperate. Here's a picture from Pacific Northwest Forest Farming Benefits. And you can see all those, there's quite a few benefits here. We're moderating the climate, we're growing fruits and nuts, we can have herbs, honeys, create fertilizer, carbon sequestration, that's a really big one. Agroforestry sequesters so much more carbon than annual crops. Systems. So we're going to sequester a lot of carbon with our agroforestry. We're building soil, we're getting more water into the soil. We have trees and woods and all kinds of other products there. Nutrient cycling, habitat. We're good agroforestry systems produce a lot of places for wildlife, birds, insects, spiders, microorganisms, etc., etc. And we need that biodiversity for a healthy, functioning world. And so agroforestry is much better at that than annual monoculture crops. Okay, anyway, it goes on here. Maybe if you're a fast reader, you could have caught all those. And so each tree is an ecology. We think of ecosystems as these complex things that cover like miles or large areas. But an actual tree in itself is a whole ecology. There's all the critters that below ground and above ground, all the things that visit it, all the birds that are part of it, the mushrooms, the fungi, all the soil life, etc., etc. What a lot of people don't know is that every plant takes about approximately 50% of all the carbon it sequesters, all the sugars it makes. It's a solar factory. And 50% of the sugars and all these different complex chemicals that it makes, it pumps out half of it down to its roots and pumps it out into the soil to feed the web of life. So all trees are feeding energy to the soil life underneath them. So they are giving to the microorganisms, and the microorganisms give back to the tree. So it's a symbiotic relationship. They're both benefiting. And so each tree is an ecology. Of course, if you spray a lot of chemical pesticides on an orchard, you kill most of that life. So, of course, we're going to be organic, natural in our agroforestry systems. A very simple agroforestry system is windbreaks and hedgerows. This shows you a very complex set of windbreaks, and you see it's covering maybe a fourth of the land mass in this particular setup, which is a pretty significant part in trees. Those trees can be timber trees, they can be habitat, they can be, in this case, it looks like they're pretty much conifer, but they are actually producing yield, and they're increasing the yield of the crops, those monocrops in the middle. So this is not my favorite type of agroforestry, but at least it's a step forward. Hedgerows are really good to have in almost every agricultural system where you do have open ground. You can see in the background of this photo there is a tree crops back there. It looks like more like an orchard, but this is an elderberry shrub row, hedgerow. It's not very. This is really young, or it may have been cut recently, but it's probably young. But look at all the flowers. I make good money on flowers. I sell elder flowers and I sell elderberries. So this hedgerow here, excuse me, will actually produce more income than whatever crop probably is next door to it. Anyway, it's a nice break in the system for wind, provides habitat and income. Some of my slides are blurry. I apologize, but you can get a system here, a sense of like a lot of trees in this system. Maybe 2/3 trees, 1/3 open ground. You can grow different kind of crops in the open ground. And then another form of agroforestry is riparian forest buffers along streams, waterways, rivers, coastlines, wherever you have water systems. Be they large or small, you should have them lined with corridors of trees and shrubs, because they are providing a net of roots that keep nutrients. Let's say they're applying fertilizers or manure to that fields next door. The tree roots and the shrub roots in the riparian buffer zone filter out and take up most of those nutrients, keep the water cleaner, they're keeping the water cooler, they're improving the aquatic life. And you should make these. You can design these so they're making good income. And right now in the United States, a lot of the money that goes into riparian forest buffers, the government says, oh, you can't harvest anything there. This is just for the wildlife or just for the ecology, and you are forbidden to make any money on it. Well, that's silly. Farmers ain't going to like that. You tell the farmer that they can make a lot of money on these systems, they're going to be much more likely to do it. And I must say that the Conservation Center and the forest and the county extension in Snohomish County, Washington, is leading the charge to make paying agroforestry systems on the riparian buffers. So I'm sure they're going to be the new trend. This is a blurry photo of Mark Shepard's agroforestry system in Wisconsin. I really like how he's done this along contour lines. It's much more aesthetically pleasing than this straight up and down lines. It also is better for keeping water in the system, soil, etc. So anyway, using contour lines for your agroforestry systems is admirable. Another form of agroforestry is syntropic agroforestry. It was started in Brazil, but they've now are adapting the systems to temperate zones. So see, this is syntropic agroforestry in a Europe temperate climate. So this is just starting. But here's the man who started syntropic agroforestry, Ernst Gausch. He's from Europe, but he's been living in Brazil most of his life, and he has set up really good systems of agroforestry there. They're exemplary. These are some of the best systems in the world. And one of the things I like about Ernst is he plants really densely, like I do. I mean, we're both two of the densest people you've ever met. I mean, densest planting people you've ever met. We plant a lot of trees and shrubs, ground cover, and you can see he does a lot of what we call chop and drop in permaculture. He's cutting leaves and limbs off of the trees, some of the trees, and he just puts them on the ground as a ground cover, as a nutrient source, and so he builds up soil, and his systems get richer and richer over time and produce more and more income. So he's got a really good, it's a system that gets better as it goes, and it produces good yields, and it starts really early. Here's an example of a syntropic agriculture system in Brazil. This is in an early phase. Over time, many of these rows of trees here are going to get bigger and bigger. I see a bunch of bananas, for instance. This will become much more of a tree system. than it looks right at the moment. But in the meantime, he's getting a lot of production from the annual crops and ground cover crops in between the tree rows. This is exactly what I do. I plant really good ground cover crops in my early systems, just like Ernst does. Here's another form of agroforestry that's really admirable. This is analog forestry. Increasing biodiversity as you get more of a towards the climax forest. This is invented by Ranil Sananayake, I say that fast, in Sri Lanka. And he developed this for the subtropics, tropics in Sri Lanka, and now it's being adapted to other parts of the world. Analog forestry, and whoever corrected this left out an A under the that's analog forestry. It's supposed to be analog. In other words, it's an analog to a forest. So he says, look, agriculture is really simple, one story. Agroforestry is better. Permaculture is better than agroforestry. And then analog forestry is better than permaculture. We would have a little fight there. And then you have a natural forest ecology. So he's saying his analog forestry systems, a type of agroforestry, are designed for smallholder farmers in Sri Lanka or tropics, subtropics, so that they can improve their yields and have a much more stable ecosystem than down at these lower parts. In other words, he considers it an advanced form of agroforestry, and I would agree with him. It's worth looking at. Here's one of the crop trees we use a lot in temperate zone agroforestry systems, the chestnut. The chestnut is a really good starch crop that comes from the trees. Instead of growing wheat and barley and oats and rye and rice and things like that. Of course, rice, we're now more in the tropics, subtropics, but we can substitute tree crops. We have tree oil crops, etc. I'll talk about crops more in a little bit. There's just a few here. Coppice agroforestry. That is where you cut off. You get a tree or a shrub growing, you cut it off to a stump, it resprouts, and you get all these stems. You can see this stem here. This is like currently the best book on coppice agroforestry you can get out there. It's very recent. Mark Krauzik would be probably the pronunciation. And this is tending trees for profit, and woodland ecology. Coppice agroforestry is old-time stuff. It's especially from Europe and especially in England, but they've used it around the world. So it's nothing new, but it's been forgotten. And so we're just restarting agroforestry or coppice systems. And one of the products of coppice systems is a lot of small wood. You can get willow shoots for like basketry and stuff, or you can make these wicker furniture. So that's one of the products. Coppice wood, you can end up with trees that big, or you can end up with a whole lot of trees that are just maybe a couple inches diameter or small shoots. So you can have a lot of different products from a coppice system. Farming the woods. So this is the understory component of agroforestry systems, because we can grow things under the tree canopy. So the tree crops the trees can be cropping, but also we can have understory. This is ginseng. This is a typical ginseng. There's golden seal. There's a lot of different crops in the tropics and subtropics where it's so much hotter sun and more sun that's more directly overhead. There's a lot more options for understory crops in here. But still, we have dozens and dozens or even hundreds of understory crops that we can use in temperate zones as well. But you get an idea. You can have beds underneath the canopy. The denser the canopy, the less light, the smaller the amount of understory crops are possible. But even in the really dense forest, there's always something. Here's a dense forest, not much light under there, but they have shiitake logs under here. So you can grow mushrooms in your understory on the logs, or you can also do understory mushrooms directly from the ground if you got your inoculation down. Here's an urban food forest. This is the Beacon Food Forest in Seattle, Washington. Now, food forest is another type of agroforestry systems. There's forest gardens, they call them, food forests, food gardens. or food gardens. There's lots of different ways of putting it, but food forest is very common these days. Everybody wants to have a food forest in their town. It can be at parks or at public lands or in schoolyards. It's very common now in Africa to put food forests in schoolyards so that the kids have something to eat because there's not as much food, not as many grocery stores, etc. there in Africa. Let me show you a particular. I'm just going to switch right now to the first book review here. This is a book called Forest Gardening. This was by Robert A. de Jahart, and he published this, let's see here, in 1991, let's see, 1996, for 1996. So I guess, I thought it was even earlier, but 1991, I guess, is when he first published this book. For some reason, I have a feeling it was even earlier. But at any rate, I can't verify that at the moment. So this might be that the 1991 is the first one for North America version. I think it was in the 70s, actually, that he first published this book. He's from England, and he was working in Africa, and he came up with the idea of forest gardening or agroforestry, and he wrote this book, and this book has really was a forerunner of its time. So if you want to read a classic book that was like one of the very first to talk about food forests, Robert A. de Jahart is a good book on that. Anyway, let's go back to the Beacon Food Forest in Seattle. The Beacon Food Forest is one of the best food forests, one of the most famous food forests in the United States right now. It was developed by some permaculture people in Seattle on some vacant or unused land in South Seattle, and it's now it's really looking good. Sorry I don't have more photos. Here's one near the entrance.
We can add photos. You don't have to have it right now. We can.
Okay, so we will add some more photos to this as we go. Great. So at any rate, here's just one of the pictures showing some of the vines and trees near the front. It started out with bare ground, and now it really is a food forest. And I have a few photos just to show trees in cities. Now, if these were trees that were producing yields, we could call it an urban agroforestry system. This is probably just plain old shade trees, but if they were black walnut, or if they were chestnut, or if they were ginkgo, or there's any number of large shade trees that actually produce yields. Now, I know of big chestnut trees over streets in Seattle where it used to be that friends of mine would go there and collect the chestnuts. Pails and buckets and basketfuls of chestnuts just laying on the road for the picking. They said, years later, it's really hard to get them anymore because the Oriental people are there first thing in the morning at the crack of dawn and picking them up. And so it's a lot harder. So there's more competition for it. So why don't we have more chestnut trees over the streets? I mean, black walnuts might make dents in cars, so I guess we'd have to be careful. But how do we have more shade trees? Because cities are heat islands, and the more greenery we put in them, the better. So same thing here. Here's a bunch of trees in a rural urban area, but they are right now designed to be functional for shade and cooling and aesthetic, but they could also be crop trees at the same time. And for anybody that's working in urban areas, I'm going to recommend that you get this book. You can find it online. Steve Solomon in Tasmania has a online library of old textbooks. He's probably got this book in there, for instance. And this book is downloadable from his library in Tasmania. And this book is The City Forest, The Keyline Plan for the Human Environment Revolution by P.A. Yeomans. Now, P.A. Yeomans is one of my heroes. He developed the Keyline system of soil and water management, which is a contour system uh, agriculture systems, uses a lot of trees in lines. That mainly is for livestock, developed in Australia, but that would be another whole slideshow. But here he's taken his keyline plan and adapted it to cities. And so anybody that's working in urban areas would really benefit from reading this book. Some of it can't be, you might say, retrofitted, but I'm sure you can get a lot of good information from this on water flows in cities. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here, folks. Here is a slide developed by Michal Kravchik in Slovakia. He's one of my favorite heroes as well. And he is very current and has come up with the systems that we would need to rehydrate the land so that we could restore the land with all these forests and agroforestry systems and regreen up the planet. So I'm just going to run around his graphic here. And so if you keep rainwater on the land, and I have other videos on that. We have a video called How to Keep Water in the Landscape is one of my videos, and it tells you how to do that. So if we keep rainwater on the land, we can store a lot of water on the planet. It would cost, and this is large scale here. This is a planetary plan. $5 trillion to achieve this regreening the planet with trees, mostly trees. Creates 100 million new jobs. No problem. We have way more than 100 million unemployed people in the world. We have actually probably maybe 1 billion unemployed people in the world. We'd be happy to have a job. 50 billion tons of carbon sequestration annually. That's a lot. 50 billion tons of CO2. There's our carbon sequestration that we need to draw down carbon. $300 billion crop yield increase annually. So it actually would go up over time, but that might be prorated over some period of time. But 300 billion extra dollars in productivity from crops, and that's a lot of food. Reduction of damage from natural disasters by $500 billion per year. Because by putting these systems in place, we more or less stop floods, or almost all floods, or at least most all of the damaging floods. Floods right now are causing, and large storms and droughts are causing here $500 billion per year. It's actually more than that. It's getting close to $1 trillion right now. But by doing this regreening and rainwater on the land catchment, we can reduce those damage to natural disasters. So now we've now are getting $500 billion a year savings in infrastructure damage, 300 billion in crop yields. So there's $800 billion a year right there that helps pay back that $5 trillion one-time investment. So in other words, it wouldn't take too many years to totally pay off our investment, and then the world is really cranking with productivity at that point, because these systems we put in are for decades and centuries. Aquifer recharge. We can recharge aquifers in the world, 140,000 cubic meters. And I don't, you have to really get your calculators out to grasp that. But it's a huge amount of water is stored in the ground. As many of you know, the world is more and more depleting its groundwater aquifers. They are going extinct. We're draining them. And as a result, we will lose a lot of crop production. This system will put the water back into the aquifers. And it will reduce the heat on the climate. There's a huge amount of trillion watt hours of heat reduction. This is cooling the planet. 300,000 TWH annual latent heat release. Too much to explain. Look at this, sea levels decline. Because we hold so much water on the land, in the landscape, and in the plants, and in the aquifers, the sea levels will actually decline instead of increase. Who would have thought of that? We can get the sea levels to go down by fixing the planet on the land. The average temperature mitigation, 1 degree centigrade for this particular scenario. Once things get into gear, we can actually lower it to 2 degrees. So in other words, we can get the planet to a really nice temperature, uh, nice interglacial temperature without all these big storms, etc. So out of this whole thing, we get eco-restoration, economic recovery, food, water, climate, social system, problems are fixed. Anyway, so it starts with keeping rainwater on the land, but all and planting plants, and all of these other things flow out of that. So that is what we're going to be talking about at our global Earth Repair Convergence in May 2025. That's this is the sort of like the grand picture. Okay. Oh yes. So now I'm going to spend a little time talking about my agroforestry system, because I don't just talk about things and read books. I do read books, a lot of books, and I do a fair amount of talking, but I actually plant and run and manage my own systems. And so here's a 25-year-old system I started 25 years ago in eastern Washington in a semi-arid zone. Hi, it's Michael Pilarski and other Friends of the Trees Botanicals video. And today I'm excited to show you some things about my forest understory. This is what's happening in my Twisp medicinal forest. It's 23, 24 years old. I think 25 since I started it, but a lot of this was planted over the first couple of years. And 23 years later, this understory has really developed. It was a semi-abandoned for a period of time, and so some of this was planted, but nature is now doing a lot of the planting herself. She is moving things around, deciding what's going to grow where. So in a sense, I started the operation in progress, but now it continues with a bit of management from me. But this is an interesting area of the understory here. This is some of the original planting of the May-apples. This is Podophyllum peltatum. This is a understory herb from the eastern woodlands. And there's one of the May-apples that will turn yellow, and it was edible. The whole plant is toxic, but the actual fruit is edible when it's ripe. Don't eat any unripe ones. But look at those beautiful leaves. That's a nice thick stalk. But at any rate, there's a patch here. And I started with a small patch, but now it's extended, 100 feet down. It's really spreading itself around in the forest. It has to grow slowly from rhizome to rhizome, but it's gradually making progress. And then the other thing that's really thick in my understory is black cohosh. So this is just like in eastern woodland, black cohosh and podophyllum, and unfortunately the golden seal was all harvested out of the system. So a lot of if you look around, we'll see more in another places, but there's just a lot of cohosh in here. Here's Oregon grape, Mahonia, that came in on its own. This is snowberry, native snowberry, and that came in on its own as well. I didn't plant it. The birds brought in seeds, and now it's become part of the understory, which is the native understory in much of our region. And so we have a real forest. There's cottonwoods and conifers, and we have 100 species on the place, or maybe 50 species of trees, understory, shrubs. Pretty complex. I had it up to 200 species at one point, so I have thousands and thousands of tree seedlings coming up in my understory, and I dig them up and sell them as one of the yields of the system. So this agroforestry system is producing enough trees to plant hundreds more like it in the area. So here I am in another understory shot. This one is mainly black cohosh, and you can just see it's just really dense. I mean, we look at this and it's like a real wild forest. It doesn't look like a cultivated space, which is really nice. There's a lot of mushrooms in the system because I have a lot of biomass. I have logs down on the ground. I have a lot of snags in the air. So it's a real ecosystem. It has a lot of birds and nesting, and it's just full of life, and including a lot of fungus. And the understory, where there is some light, here's a situation where there's a bit of a light well, and I can have all these annual crops, or not, these are actually all perennial crops for the most part. Actually, there's some annuals in there as well, but I can have understory crops pretty dense that are mostly medicinal herbs. I should mention that my systems are medicinal agroforestry systems because we grow medicinal crops. And when I planted my 25-year-old system, it was designed and planted to be a medicinal agroforestry system. So I right at the beginning, I knew what I wanted. I wanted a medicinal production system, and that's what I got. One of the things we planted was linden trees. Linden flowers are just making excellent, excellent tea, very highly prized in Europe. It's sort of a calming end of the day tea. And you harvest the flowers, they're very fragrant. And so one of the ways I'm harvesting it is the trees start getting tall, and so I cut some of the branches off and some of the tops off. They fall to the ground, and then we pick all the leaves and the flowers, and then they regrow. So it's a form of coppicing. Up in the air, it's actually called pleaching. Or no, anyway, there's a lot of diversity here, but one of the ways we harvest is actually we bring some of the tops down to us. This is cramp bark, Viburnum trilobum, and these are shrubs. I have a lot of them in my system, and I've been thinning out the stems, and then I cut up the various the twigs, the stems, the leaves. I dry it all, and we sell it for cramp bark. It's for cramping. Mostly women are using it, and so it's one of my biggest yields right now in the system. And that's a coppicing system. I cut off a bunch of the stems or thin them out, and then they regrow new stems. And so it's a rotation system. We also have some conifers in the system. One of them, we really like juniper, year-round cover. And look at the berry crop on this one. Oh boy. So we can sell all of those juniper berries. It's a really nice medicine. So this is a medicinal tree. And I have kept some open areas in the system. This is actually the only large open area in between the tree areas. So you can see trees on both sides. And this one is mainly planted to perennial herb crops. But this year, this area was tilled, and I got most of it in now in shrubs, berries, and perennial herbs. So there's very little. Most of the area has never been cultivated once. After 25 years ago, we cultivated it to start the planting, but now it's a no-till system except for a bit of this open area. It's very aesthetic. Anyway, it's a very beautiful place. And it takes very little maintenance. It's amazing. Other than irrigating it, it's got an irrigation system. I hardly put any time into this these days. Mostly it's harvest, a little bit of puttering in the planting some new crops, restoration work. I have to do a lot of. Some things are too thick, and so I have to clean up and cut open areas. But at any rate, it's a pretty low maintenance system. Here's a new system. I just put this in last year. So it was a sod grass pasture. We had it tilled up. It wasn't a great tillage job, but it was good enough. And so now we're planting trees and shrubs. I put 100 European elderberries, 100 European black currants, and then 100 other trees and shrubs as well. This is 1/7 of an acre. It's a pretty small little area. And then we planted medicinal herbs in between all the trees and shrubs. You can see to the left of the tilled area, you can see a row of black currants that have just been put in. But anyway, this is last year. This was a dense planting by the time it was done. But this is what it looks like in year one. But this is a year one agroforestry system. This is like a month or less. This is like maybe 2 or 3 weeks after it was tilled, and we're going at it. This is a shot now in western Washington. Those other ones were all eastern Washington, semi-arid. Now we're on the Olympic Peninsula in a wetter zone, temperate zone. We're just really close to the Canadian border here in the state of Washington. And we just put in a pollinator. Actually, this is a pollinator hedgerow that was put in a couple years prior to this. You can see there's a row of shrubs right down the middle. I'm right by some red osier dogwood here I see in this particular shot. But we have like 20 kinds of shrubs mixed in here. And then we have a ground story herb crops. You can see a row back of me there stretching out. And we're tilling up, we're just getting ready to plant some stuff. So this is probably the second year from planting this pollinator hedgerow. And here's a shot of some of the understory. You can see shrubs here as a cascara tree, and then there's oregano under there. There's a lot of dandelion that we crop. And anyway, we have a lot of different herb crops in this underneath the trees and next to them in our pollinator hedgerows. So this was built especially for as a windbreak in between apple orchards on either side, and as an ecosystem, and to help pollinators. So as you can see here, this is like, I think this is the fourth year, or I think, for this system. So the trees and shrubs are getting much taller. And this year we actually put a bunch of oat straw, or oats, as a crop in part of the system. And so we get a yield from the oats, and there's a lot of different herbs in here as well. So you might call it a long linear agroforestry system. Here is comfrey and lemon balm and angelica, and growing in between linden and lilacs. Anyway, very dense cover, and you can see we're getting a lot of different rows of plants in a small area. Our main input is the big pile of chips you see in the background. We bring in bark and chip mix that we use for mulching. It's our biggest fertilizer input is the chips. We don't we fertilize in the first year with minerals, but after that, the main input is our chips. And so that's it. Here's a QR code. If anybody can whip out their cameras really fast. You're on a computer, most of you anyway. But anyway, here's a QR code that can take you to our website. This is the website for our botanicals. Because we have them, like I say, medicinal herb farms, and we sell herbs all over the United States to tincture companies, etc. So we have a nice income from a family business, doing good things, right livelihood, and it's an agroforestry systems with a lot of ground cover as well. And let's see, here is the poster for our Global Earth Repair Convergence we're having this next May. You can see May 9th to 13th, 2025. And that's the kind of thing we're going to be talking about. Agroforestry systems, how to rehydrate the planet, how to repair the oceans, how do we fix up the planet? Because the planet needs a lot of fixing. And I don't think, some people don't like the word earth repair, but I challenge you to tell me that the world doesn't need some repair out there, folks. We have a lot of work to do. Humanity does. And we can fix the planet. We can turn this around. We know how to do it. And that's what our conference is about. So if you're interested, yeah, you can come if you want. It's up here in the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. So I wish you a good day. And I hope that some of you actually have agroforestry systems, or will start some. Well, thanks for watching, and go out there and do useful things for the planet. We're all part of the solution.